So I will take a pass at the first part of this, which is how we came to want to make a film related to this subject of uh, children, independence, and what kind of childhood leads to healthy, happy, competent adults. Um, Really, we were friends, Eden and I, who had known each other for a long time, who were having conversations about our own parenting. Both grew up in New York City, which is a city where autonomy is that lends itself to autonomy just because you're not reliant on cars. And that was really the initial focus, was about why our own kids weren't navigating the city as early as we were, and why did we feel pressured to delay this, and then what other kinds of things were we also feeling pressure to change relative to our own childhood, and were these good decisions or not? And I think we just sort of started examining that, and were introduced to Lenore Skenazy pretty early in the process. She was our first interview, New York based, whose child rode the subway at age 9, and that resonated early with what we were thinking about. And she was already working in other places. And I would just say, and we had already read Julie Lescott-Hames' book, How to Raise an Adult. So we were starting to realize this was not just our world, but was in more places. And I think that that's really how it led us to Wilton. And in terms of like how long this film took to make, you mean to shoot or all together? And this was a few years of our life, but also just because it took us a while. We went in search of, we had access to a lot of experts, but we knew we wanted kids and real people's lives in the film, and that took a little longer to find.
Well, and you follow one person, Savannah Eason, and her kind of change of mind. I thought that was really good to find out how she ends up in cooking, loving the culinary arts and a little sense of her childhood. I thought you chose examples which really posited the conflict, the hovering parent versus the too much perhaps independence parent. And it's as much about parenting as it is about childhood. But I think the title is really clever, Chasing Childhood, when in fact we're talking to the parents. How is this working? How are our children responding? And the various ages. What were some of the challenges you found? It's such a big subject. It's so kind of universal for us all to answer who have parented or been parented or are parenting. How did you hone in on free play and over supervision?
I mean,
You should go ahead.
I think that it stems from what Margaret was saying initially about what our own conversations were, what our struggles were as parents ourselves, and where our interests lied. And then because we were speaking with Julie and with Lenore and with Peter Gray and reading their books and their research and so on and so forth, it became clear also not only that this was what we were most interested in, but it seemed that this angle hadn't really been explored in a film before, whereas there are a lot of films that cover aspects of what this film is getting at. And we wanted to make sure that we were contributing something new. And I think at the outset, all along, our hope has been that the film can start a cultural conversation, and that maybe we're at an inflection point and perhaps we can start to shift a little bit. And I think that the pandemic in some ways may help with that. I think it's unclear how life is going to kind of go back. And, if we're going to, I know that I personally feel like there are many things I can't wait to return to, but the overscheduled, overbusyness of my whole family's life is something that I don't want to return to whole hog. Like, I'd like to try and keep a firm rein on like having a little less going on. And I think that's going to be challenging to do, frankly, because everybody's so eager to get back. But I think, you know, it varies obviously family to family, community to community, how this pandemic how we've endured it. And, you know, certainly Margaret and I have heard many stories across the board that range from kids suffering terribly in this pandemic to incredible resiliency and, you know, really silver linings coming out of having fewer activities and so on. And so, you know, I don't think that there's any one way or any one answer to how things will look, but we're really hoping that the launch of the film can, at this really important moment in time, can be the beginning of maybe a little bit of a re-examination of what it looks like.
Mimi, I just was wondering if I could just add, I think you asked about Genevieve in particular and Savannah, her daughter. And I think that one of the things that was exciting about landing on that family was we really want to be a part of a force of hope, and did not want to be all doom and gloom. And so to have a family that had been through it, even though there's a looking in the past, but kind of came through it and wanted to then be an agent of change, I think was, no matter where else we looked, that ended up being the most inspiring story, and was hoped was like a, you know, if Genevieve can come out of this, and who was a mom who believes she did it all wrong, and I'm not saying she did, because I don't think she did it all, but like if she could do it again, would do things differently. Then I think there's like a sense that anyone, you know, any mom could do it, and any daughter, even if they've been, or any child, I should say, even if they've been through this very hard time, can maybe land where their passion is. And it's like very, you know, I continue to get emotional about it as mom, but it's like inspiring.
Yeah, I do applaud you for choosing that as an example of the conflict that Savannah goes through and then resolves. There is a ton of hope there, because it starts with she's just celebrating a year of sobriety. So you learn right away after that very happy childlike beginning that no, not all is good in paradise. Actually, there was issues. And then to evolve into this very happy person who found something she loves to do. So clearly her mother, Genevieve, didn't do everything wrong. She did some right. She at least taught her resilience. So there's that good element, which is tricky sometimes, because viewers can come away with, that's a damned situation, or that's all good and no bad. And I think the nuances were good choices. I think I wondered how Lenora Skenazy, is that how you say it?
Lenore, yeah.
How do you feel she's going to be responded to? I can hear people saying, oh my God, putting your child on this. I lived in New York for 15 years. I don't know if I put my daughter on the subway at 9, but it seemed to work. And she had such energy and she had such enthusiasm. She was so clever that you were captivated by this character and what she was advocating as well.
I mean, Lenore is someone who some people might say that's really crazy and she went too far. But I think that what she does with kids and families is to say, try something you've never done before, talk about it with your parents and have it be right for you. And she is very good at reflecting back to kids, even when it's a really simple thing, like I'm going to cook dinner, that's enough.
Yeah, and you know, I think the thing that both Lenore and Julie talk a lot about, which I hope is a takeaway for viewers, is that it's not about pushing your kids to do something that seems scary. It's about allowing your kids,
making it palatable for families to try something, to give their kids independence.
I think we lost you for a second. Margaret, could you just repeat your last 2 sentences?
Oh, Eden, you go ahead.
Sorry, I think I was talking over Margaret, not realizing she was speaking because I didn't hear her. Sorry. I was just saying that with both Lenore and Julie, I think they're both and I think this is a really important takeaway from the film, that I hope comes through, is that it's not about pressuring your kid to do something that he or she doesn't feel comfortable doing. It's about finding the thing that a child may be developmentally ready for, that as a family you haven't quite felt comfortable with yet. And, Julie always says, first you do it for them, then you do it with them, then you let them do it, then you watch them do it, and then you let them do it alone, And I think that there's no doubt Lenore was criticized terribly for letting her 9-year-old go on. I mean, that's why she was called the worst mother in the world. And, there was, as she says, there's like 75 Google pages about her being the worst mother in the world.
Oh, really?
And it was overwhelming. But, I think in my own family, I've had, I had a kid who was asking to do things sooner than seemed culturally acceptable. But I actually did believe that he was ready. He asked in 2nd grade, why don't you let me go to the store with a list and do some grocery shopping for you? Like, I can do that. And I let him do that. And similarly, he also wanted to take the subway at 9, and he did it. And, it was scary for me because other kids weren't doing it. But I think that, as Margaret and I remember, we were taking public transportation around New York City in elementary school, 3rd grade. I was taking the public bus to school by myself. And as the bus was full of other kids. It wasn't as though I was the only one, but for a variety of reasons that we explore a little bit in the film, the world has changed in terms of what's perceived to be okay or safe. And I think what's interesting for us as New Yorkers is just to look at, how crime has dropped so dramatically since the 1970s when I was taking the bus to school by myself, and so was Margaret. And yet when you speak to parents in New York City about kids taking public transportation by themselves at 3rd grade or 4th grade, they're just like, no way, it's so dangerous. Oh my God, I don't want my kid to be abducted, And we hope that this will help people reconsider a little bit how they're viewing these kinds of actions. Because I think the most important thing is to understand, I mean, a psychologist that we spoke with that made this point that really stuck with me and Margaret is just that the age at which kids leave home has not changed, but the age at which we let kids hit certain developmental markers that historically were happening much earlier is getting later and later and more delayed. So
for example,
like
what marker would they be older than, say?
Well, it used to be normal there used to be but in the 70s, there was a 1st grade readiness, which included how far you were able to walk around your block or your neighborhood, which was pretty national. So that would be one. Being able to, use a stove in your house and cook and help out with certain chores in the family.
Take a bike ride to a neighbor's house.
Take a bike ride. Kids aren't learning. There are kids who would come from areas who would normally be riding bikes who are not learning how to ride at all. I mean, some of these are not milestones that you would think are necessary to live a fulfilled life. I mean, there's the climb a tree when you've a lot of things that are just
walk home from school, go to the store.
Do an errand for your family for the first time. Even things that are not dangerous, like get dressed by yourself, take a bath by yourself, pack your bag and lunch by yourself for school. There are things that have just parents don't feel like kids should be doing by themselves that don't have anything to do with the big fears of your kid being kidnapped.
But I think just to get back to the Yulia point, which is that, so they're leaving home at the same age, whether it's to go to college, to the military, what have you, but the amount of the time at which they're allowed to learn and hopefully gain some competency so that they can take care of themselves is getting later and later. And this psychologist is drawing a line between that and this increased anxiety rate in kids, because when you don't feel competent and you don't feel that you can care for yourself, it's anxiety producing. And so I think that what we're hoping for is, and what I think what we've been trying to do in our own families through all that we learned in the making of this film, is to give our kids the chance to do the things that they're ready to do when they're ready to do them in a safe way, so that they can feel confident and competent and gain the traits that they need to live happy and fulfilled lives.
I think that it provided a fresh perspective about not programming kids so much. I mean, we hear that a lot. I've been hearing that, and my daughter's in her 20s, and we heard that then. But I think what you did is show that from the voices of the kids. It was amusing, it was charming, it was really believable and authentic. Rather
Thank you.
than parents sitting around saying, "What, we shouldn't have them do something," but having these kids talk and capturing those reality moments, I think, are some of the best spots in the film. Just hearing and how articulate they are, saying sort of, "I can't believe I'm doing all these things, but my mother wants to," was, I thought, very sharp in the film. And I do think the perspective, I think Lenore's perspective is fresh, free play and more independent. So I also think that it could have come out on one side or the other. Do you feel it does? And the other question I want to get to is diversity. Do you think that this is true sort of for middle class, mostly white, or can we apply this to not necessarily different cultures, but sort of across the American landscape?
So I want to answer this a little bit, and I don't think I have a perfect answer, but I think it is much more widespread and in more communities from people who look different than people realize, and in different ways. So it is still not okay for, in fact, if you have brown skin and this was actually the DC mom who was arrested, I think you're actually more likely to end up frankly punished for letting your kids roam around if you're from certain backgrounds than others. So there are elements of this that really relate to people. We always say this is not really a film about poverty, but there are elements that really cut across different backgrounds and culture, and obviously impact people in different ways. I also think that, and in some ways, if you are working class on up, the pressure to have your kid be able to succeed, to move out of where they came from, is really great. And I think that's one of the things you really see in Patchogue, that they will, they will go into debt to have their kids do specialized sports. They will, everything depends on it. And I also think that, like, even we saw this, see this a lot in a sort of first gen immigrant community, again, cutting across racial and ethnic backgrounds, such pressure, such drive to push these kids to kind of make it out from where they come from. So I'm sure there are communities and different socioeconomic backgrounds that are hit less hard, but I do think that there are elements that are relatable. And I also think this element of free play, which again, I think in some ways is even harder when you're in communities where it might not be safe to go outside, or you might need a group to close a street. This actually happened in Harlem during the pandemic. There were neighborhood play streets. I think that, play and street play has always been a part of people from all backgrounds, and is necessary for healthy human development. And the schools in a lot of those communities feel tremendous pressure to have those kids succeed on test scores. And often that's a real struggle, but don't see the value in giving them recess and other things as part of their school day, where they arguably need it even more than in an affluent community. So I don't know if that answers that question, but.
No, I think that was a really strong point. I was glad to see, glad to see examples of these kids loving research, even if it's inside in one room, banging the ball around. To both of you, who do you want to see this film? Where do you want it to go? And speaking of the pandemic, it seems like it calls for a sequel. How did this play out in a pandemic situation? But you don't have to answer that. But just in terms of this film, what's your ideal trajectory for it?
I mean, I think we really hope that it'll be viewed in school districts, by PTAs, churches, temples, communities across the country, and that they'll take the opportunity to maybe do a Let Grow project in their school. Maybe they'll have somebody, one of the experts from the film, come Zoom in and to them, that they'll utilize. We're developing resources for discussion guides and so on and so forth. I mean, we really want this to get out there, to start a conversation among educators, among parents. We love hearing from young people who watch the film. I was just interviewed by a freshman in college yesterday for a college newspaper, and she was saying how much she related to the overscheduling aspect and how much it reflected her own experience. So, I mean, we also feel like it's a kids' rights movie, and we'd love to hear from kids. So, I mean, I can't say that there's a limit to what we hope for with the film, but as we were saying in the beginning, we really made it to try and impact some change around the issues that the film raises. So we just hope that it can be seen widely and discussed, and that community can start to feel like they can allow their kids to do things that maybe they weren't doing before, and so on and so forth.
Are you looking to get it into Netflix or on television or public television or what? You hope to get it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We'd love it to be on a streamer. I think right now that's not we've started this outreach and impact campaign. And so that's where our energy is going at this moment. Yeah. And then, there's always these windows with when you do what. But absolutely, we hope we hope to get it to as many eyeballs as we can in communities, in countries where this is an issue. And we did discover that this is not just in the United States. It's in Europe, it's in parts of Asia. I mean, it's relatable in multiple cultures. Of course, we had to kind of make hard choices and limit it to the 3 communities that you see in the film. Mm-hmm. But that's because that's the nature of filmmaking. You can't tell. Right. You can't tell too big a story, or else it just. No.
And I would just say as an addition, and we don't know for sure yet, but we are exploring having a podcast called Chasing Childhood. We hope that happens, because there is a space that for these issues and real stories and real families to touch on plenty of things that we were not able to go deep on in the film, that we would like to be able to keep following. So hopefully that will happen.
One particular thing that you wish you could have done more on?
I think one of the things that comes up a lot that Eden is much more expert on than I am, but that we just felt like we couldn't delve into, is this sports specialization, like the real specialization issue. And there's been tons written about it, actually, and the awareness that it doesn't even yield necessarily some kids who are more likely, even the best of them, to be professional athletes, but also just the harm that it does. And there's not really a news flash and not to mention debt and cost and what it does to families, right. And repetitive injuries. So I think that's something that really would lend itself to something that would be a great story that we are already, talking about. But.
And then it's something else that I always wish could be in there. Again, I don't know that it's an ongoing story the way the sports specialization is, but just sleep. Like the lack of, I think that this may be
on your part or
but how sleep deprived so many children are.
Yeah.
And it's staggering. And, we had interviews, we heard about the lack of sleep, both from kids and from pediatricians we interviewed, and educators we spoke with who were doing studies in their school saying, the average high schooler in their community was getting 6 hours a night, and how many fewer hours that is than is actually recommended. And, the things that why sleep is important. I just like, that was one that we had to cut out of the movie. We had a whole little, for a little while on the rough cut, there was a whole interstitial about sleep, but
I would echo that. That is really critical, and it lasts through your life if you don't learn how to sleep right. Just sort of winding up, what was the biggest challenge? And maybe each of you have a different moment that was really the challenge in making this film. And then I want to know what was the best part in making it from each of you.
Well, I would point to two challenges if that's okay, but I can be brief. One is we had a lot of amazing people who were experts, and we had to cut them out of the film. And so we're trying to figure out what to do with those voices still. We had just a tremendous number of people who were willing to speak to us. So that was hard. And then the other hardest part was really just finding a story of characters where there was any kind of an arc. We had lots of access to people and families and kids, but I think that was the hardest part.
It's always a hard nut to crack, but I think you did it with your families. Well, particularly, I think you did it with the Easons.
Yeah. And I guess I would just add, I agree with everything Margaret said in terms of challenges. But then once we found those families, I think just the responsibility of telling a family's story in a fair way that feels true and that is compassionate and real and sensitive and not sensationalist, and it feels like an enormous responsibility. And particularly when you have the trust of a family like the Easons, where they're giving you all their family archive, and they were extraordinary and generous in there. And I believe, and I think they say this in the movie, that they felt very strongly that if their story could help other families, that was something they wanted to really make public. But I felt like they trusted us, and that was an enormous responsibility. And I think that we did right by them. Like, they were very happy with the film, and that was I can't even tell you what a thrill it was to hear, and how nerve-wracking it was to show it to them for the first time, and then to realize that they were happy was amazing. So that's something that I carried very close to my heart the entire time, and I felt nervous about. So it was hard, but also great.
Well, I think, there are definite moments that you are very moved, and you want a viewer to be moved and to be inside that film and moved by what is moving your characters. And I felt you got a number of those. Anything more you want to say about the message of this film? And
I would add something that I find, I don't know why this helps me, especially since I have a kid who tumbled down a hill today, but made it back. Genevieve actually said this when we were filming her. And she was actually talking about mental health, but she said, we always think about what happens, if you climb a tree and you get hurt, but like, nobody thinks about what happens if you never climb the tree. And that really resonated for me as a fairly anxious mom. Like, there is a risk budget that we need to make as families. Sure, you can do really safe free play, but and it is echoing a story that I'm sure a lot of your viewers have heard, The Blessings of a Skinned Knee. But that's hard. It's really hard to be a parent and to put your kids in, to have your kids do things where they might have a fight, where they might have to work things out for themselves. And, it's not just about the harrowing deprogramming of kids. It's about they're going to have to, and I really love that with Peter Gray. And you mentioned free play earlier. And I just think free play is a lot of things. And free play also is tumbling, working things out, and and figuring them out. And I really hope that families take that and not just this piece about scheduling in college.
Yeah. No, I like your term risk budget. Got to have a risk budget. That's very, very useful and true. So anything else you'd like it to do or where it goes? I mean, I think your direction is going to determine it. It's powerful, asking powerful questions. And
We would love for people to go to our website, chasingchildhooddoc.com, and we would love for people to know that we can come to your community with a film, and that we are we'll have a discussion guide for both parents and ultimately children. And this is meant to be a launch pad for conversations to help people talk about what's right for them, their families, and their communities, and for them to figure it out for themselves with some guidance.
And are you released now? Is it out? Is your film out?
It's available now only through Real Link, which is part of doing our outreach and impact.
Right.
And then it will be available in probably sometime in the coming year in a broader way. But it is available now to like book a screening to bring to your community. And we hope people will do that.
Well, I think with the coming summer possibly opening up, but still being cautious, and then school, it's a really relevant time for it to be lasted everywhere, right?
Thank you, Mimi. We're excited.
Yeah.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you all very much. This was really fun. I could go on forever. I could listen to you forever. It will be on
Thank you.
Monday, and there's a time, and it'll be streaming, but you've got the details, and your discussion and comments will come right after the film.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Nice to meet you.